Hey everyone, happy Tuesday. How you feeling? Feeling good? Good to see you all. We're gonna look at 1 Kings tonight. Want to say what's up to everybody who's watching online. Hope you're doing well. Give this video a thumbs up, share it with a friend, that'd be fantastic. I was just telling Ty in the front that he had given me a shirt that said, introverted but willing to talk about Nephilim, and I was wearing it at the gym, and this guy came up to me when I was leaving and was like, can I take a picture of your t-shirt? My kids don't believe me about the Nephilim. And I was like, yes, man of God, take a picture of this t-shirt. And I know that the least believable part of that story was that I was at the gym. So I understand that. And I was in the sauna, and this kid walks in and he goes, hey, Pastor Landon. I go, hey. I go, what are you working out today? He goes, my shoulders. What are you working out? And I was like, my depression. All right, now we've given people enough reason to stop watching. Why don't you grab your Bible and let's look at 1 Kings together. If you are watching online, you have a question, you can drop those in there. That would be fantastic. We are rapidly going through the Old Testament. I group the first 5 books, the books of Moses, as God's law. That's Genesis through Deuteronomy. That's where we learn about the covenant with Eve and Adam and Abraham and Moses, and then God's nation. We're right in the middle of that. We're looking at 1 and 2 Kings. There is some documents at the door. If you're here in person, if you're watching online, they're in the description box below. You can grab those if you like stuff like that. We're looking at 1 and 2 Kings, or as Donald Trump would say, 1 and 2 Kings. And it is the history of God's kings and the people's kings. Here's a timeline of the Old Testament. You can see as you're looking that 1 and 2 Kings stretches an incredibly large amount of the Old Testament. So you can see the very distorted dot on there that I have stretched out until it has lost its form. And that is because 1 and 2 Kings cover an incredibly large amount of time. David is in the very beginning, and by the time we're done with 1 and 2 Kings, the kingdom's divided, both kingdoms are in exile. We're all the way to 586 by the time we're done with this. So this stretches an incredibly, incredibly large amount of time. There's a sequence that I had written to help people understand where we're at in the Kings. In Joshua, the kingdom was cleared. I probably would use a different word if I wrote that again today. I probably would say, no, cleared is fine. In Judges, the kingdom was defiled. In Samuel, the kingdom was promised, and that's the flip, because now they're talking about a different kingdom, right? And in Kings, the kingdom gets divided. So realistically, I could have put the first 2 and the 4th one with like a lower k, and that would have kind of actually hit better, because the kingdom of Jesus Christ doesn't have swords and castles. It has hearts and joy and things that are far better than that. Kings also has a cycle. So like Judges, Kings, not as strictly as Judges, but there is kind of like a general cycle outside of the gigantic break for Elijah and Elisha. There is this kind of general cycle. They introduce a new king. They tell a little bit about the timing and his family. They state whether he was good or evil, and then they talk about how he died. I do think that it's funny, and I do think that that was kind of the point a little bit. I think if someone wrote a document today that was like, then there was Ronald Reagan, and he lived, and he did some stuff, and then he died. And then there was Bush Sr., and he lived, did a couple things, then he died. And that we would all understand that that is not necessarily satire, but kind of like a tongue-in-cheek way of expressing something. I do think that that's what the author was going for. You don't have to, though. That's totally okay. And so here are some more keys for Kings, some more keys for understanding the books of the Kings, because there's only supposed to be one. This one, of all the ones that got split into 2 books, they did the worst job of picking where they're going to split it. They split it right in the story of Elijah. It's like, come on, the Septuagint, what are you doing to us? Terrible. It's like when they couldn't make enough money off movies, so they started splitting the third one of trilogies into 2 parts. Except even there, they thought about the ending. Anyways, my Jewish studies professor in college was named Michael Rydelnik, and he called Kings a history of messianic miscalculations. And I've always thought that was a very brilliant way of expressing what the author was going for and what was going on in the text. The whole point of the text is that you get David, then you get Solomon, then it keeps getting worse. That's the whole thing. So you have this promise in your head. Oh my gosh, there is this forever king, and he's coming. It's gotta be Solomon. Look, this guy's amazing. And then it isn't, and then everything gets way worse with Solomon, and then it's a dumpster fire after that. That's the idea. It's like a dating app for picking a Messiah, and people are, I don't know, which way do you swipe if you don't like the person? Which way is that? Oh, I get it. If you know that, you can't say that you know that because we're at church. So I can't remember. Whichever way is the way that you're like denying someone, that's the way. Everyone's like swiping on that. And so, yeah. Kings takes us through several hundred years of history. We talked about that, but let's look at this idea here, which is also on your sheet if you grabbed one when you walked in. There are 3 main narratives, and I think that the main narratives get really undermined because of the fact that it's split into 2 books. Don't think of it as 2 books. It's not. Think of it as 1 book. That's what it is. I would be very open for Bibles just putting them back together. There's no point for them to be separated. It's one story. It genuinely gets confusing when they're split into 2. It's the story of Solomon, then the story of Elijah and his protege Elisha, and that's where it gets split in the middle of that. And then the story of good and evil kings, which is sprinkled all throughout. And we're gonna look at all of that. And I made a thing to help you guys. So I made a document that has all of the kings of the United Kingdom, all of the kings of the separate kingdom, and then if they were good or bad, and then which prophet was prophesying during their time. Because this is a really cool thing that starts happening during Kings. When you have Moses, when you have Joshua, you have this prophet, priest, and king combo. You have the guy that's legally in charge, spiritually in charge, and prophetically in charge. And then as you go through the Old Testament, that feature starts dividing more and more. And that is one of the things that the author's going for in Kings. Why all of a sudden in chapter 17 are we talking about Elijah the Tishbite? Because the kings are a disaster and they're trying to update you on what's going on spiritually in the country. And so they're giving you this kind of like anchor spiritually. So as prophet, priest, and king spread out before they're gathered together in Jesus Christ the Lord, yeah, I think I made that clear. Okay, cool. So then let's look at the outline. You guys like a good Bible outline? Oh, I love stuff like this. It's my fave. I love a good Bible outline. This one's from J. Vernon McGee. I changed it just a little bit, but it's mostly his ideas. And I loved the way that he divided it because he made it one outline through 1st and 2nd Kings, just like I would. So we got kind of like the end of David. We got like the David RIP section. Then we have the reign of Solomon. Then the kingdom is divided. And then there is the first moment of exile, the decline of the southern kingdom, and the second moment of exile. Who was here when we studied the book of Ezekiel? Oh, I knew I loved you guys. The weak have already left. They're gone. Only Brad remains. But we are getting so quickly to that actual part historically. We're not getting to Ezekiel quickly, but we're getting to the point when Ezekiel was written very, very quickly here. So let's do like a quick walkthrough of the text. and then I will give you some more keys. Does that sound good? Okay, let's do that. So in the first 2 chapters, we have this section that is kind of like the end of David. And it's kind of a bit confusing because it said before that it was David's last words. Those were like David's official last words, in the sense that like if you were famous and a reporter came and were like, what's your last words? And you said them to the reporter, they would write your last words in a newspaper, but then you still maybe said some more things afterwards. That's the general idea of the text. David reigned as king for 40 years. And his death being used as the beginning of Kings is very intentional by the author, because 2 Samuel 7 is about the coming king. The coming king, the king is not David, but he's going to be like David. And so when they start with David and everything goes downhill from there, and then we'll see at the very, very end of 2 Kings how there's this little kind of twist ending that shows that we're waiting for the Messiah. We'll look at that in a couple weeks, because next week we have the Passover. And so then it moves into this section that's about the reign of Solomon. Chapter 4, verse 29 says that God gave Solomon wisdom and understanding beyond measure, and the breadth of mind like the sand on the seashore. It was in this moment that God gave to Solomon the wisdom, you're probably familiar with the story, to become the person that could write Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon. Solomon is such an iconic figure because he's, like, in my opinion, better than David at the things David was amazing at, and way worse than David at the things that David was bad at. He's like David squared. He's like, oh yeah, my dad wrote 73 Psalms. I'll write 1 billion Proverbs, and I'll write the greatest treatment on depression the world has ever seen, and I will write a super sexual book that weird theologians are going to say is about Jesus in the 19th and 20th centuries. And people are always like, Song of Solomon's about Jesus. And I'm like, good Lord, I hope not. I hope not. I'm feeling all sorts of ways while I read that. Ty knows what I'm talking about. And I do not want that to be about Jesus Christ the Lord. So David in this, or Solomon in this moment becomes this person who can do this. And the text is very clearly organized around creating and subverting an expectation. The expectation is, if you're reading narratively, oh my gosh, this is the guy. They said your son, they meant your son, not like your. So then you're reading it and you're like, this is amazing. And then he builds the temple. And everybody's like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And then he makes a lot of decisions that are in Israel. And there's a lot of really interesting things about the narrative about Solomon. I personally think the stuff that Solomon wrote is even more interesting than his narratives in scripture. So I'm really looking forward to the week that we do Ecclesiastes, the week that we do Proverbs, and the week that we do Song of Solomon. That being said, in chapters 5 through 8, there's this huge narrative about Solomon building the temple, and it's really intriguing because God designed the tabernacle, but Solomon designed the temple, which is just really interesting. It's very, very unique comparatively with the ark, the tabernacle, and the temple in Ezekiel, which are direct blueprints from God. It's just interesting. I don't really have a point as to why I think that, I don't know what that means, but it's just very interesting and it stands out in the text. Solomon prays this beautiful prayer of dedication for the temple, and he is standing on Mount Moriah when he prays this prayer of dedication. And if you're not familiar with biblical geography, it will not be apparent to you how absolutely iconic this is. Because where Solomon built the temple is the same place as the Temple Mount in Jerusalem right now. Where Solomon built the temple is the same exact place where Abraham was going to offer Isaac. It's now covered in stone, but there's like a small mount, a small hill under it. It's the same exact place where Haggai and Nehemiah and Ezra were all going to go back to try to rebuild the stuff. It's the same exact place where Jesus flipped over the tables of the money changers. It's, if you see like people at the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem, that's the side of it. This is like the most iconic location in the whole world. It's where Herod's temple was. All of that stuff is in exactly the same spot, and it's right here. And he's standing there when he prays this absolutely iconic prayer. So this location goes from Genesis all the way through to Jesus and, of course, beyond. Here's some more stuff about Solomon. I've touched on some of this stuff. My guy was rich, good for him. And he turned from the Lord. It's a disaster. It actually says that God raised up an adversary against him, which is horrible. Ahijah prophesied against him that the kingdom was going to be torn into two, and that's what comes in just a moment. And that is an abject disaster. We can't associate that idea with the way that we think about America, because for some of us, if like some of the states seceded, we'd be like, that's great, because who cares, right? This is not that. This is a disaster because they have a messianic promise and a promise to Abraham that it seems like isn't happening. So when this guy prophesies that it's going to be torn, ripped, that is a disaster. It's true, but it also doesn't negate the covenant. This is why when you understand the covenants, the stories are so interesting. Because if you don't understand what promises these people are holding in their hearts, you're like, oh, the kingdom's going into, it's like the Civil War. No, it's way more intense than that. It's like the Civil War if George Washington said that God told him to cut down the cherry tree and then to sacrifice his 35th great-grandson on it to save America. Do you know what I mean? It's like, and they all believed it. It's such a big deal comparatively. Solomon also famously married like 1 billion people. I can't imagine the moment where Solomon was like, all right, good morning. He's eating an egg, and they're like, hey, what do you want to do today? You just had your 600th wedding yesterday. And he was like, I think let's go again. Let's go again. The next section is the kingdom divided. And so this is the part where the kingdom starts breaking, and this is not good. This is the part where it seems like the things that God is saying are not going to come true. You have Rehoboam, you have Jeroboam. Rehoboam's Solomon's son, he's David's grandson, and he tried to do the kind of like big guy play, and everybody rebels, and that's when the kingdom gets divided. That's in 1 Kings chapter 12. So narratively, that would be one of the biggest moments in the Old Testament, right there in 1 Kings 12. It says, so Israel has been in rebellion against the house of David to this day. And when all Israel heard that Jeroboam had returned, they sent and called him to the assembly and made him king over all Israel. There was none that followed the house of David, but the tribe of Judah only. So from then on, you'll see language like the northern kingdom, that's the kingdom of Israel, and the southern kingdom, that's the kingdom of Judah. And it's confusing because the kingdom before was called the kingdom of Israel. But it actually makes sense when you think about it. If there was like a state that seceded, the United States wouldn't make a different name. It would still be called the United States. Do you know what I mean? So it's kind of like that. And so then Jeroboam is a disaster. He makes 2 golden calves, and it is exactly what you're supposed to be thinking. That happened, but the reason the author included it was the idea is that he's doubling down on one of the lowest points of the people of Israel. And so then after that, you have Abijam, who's evil, Asa, who is good. I got taught in grade school that Asa had stinky feet from chapter 15:23, but it's not what it means. It means that he had a foot disease. And then you have Nadab, Baasha, Elah, Zimri, Omri, and Ahab. And they're all worse than the previous one. And the reason that they are worse is that they continue to double down on what their dad did. They go further and further and further and further and further into worship of Baal and Asherah, which are pagan sex cults. And so then we meet our hero, and that is Elijah. And he confronts Ahab. He declares a jar of flour bottomless during a drought. He raises a kid from the dead. We get to meet Obadiah and Ahab and Elijah. Ahab was the last king in that list that has come so far. They have a God showdown in 1 Kings 19, and it's like one of the best chapters in the Old Testament. It's so great. It's such a great chapter. They're on Mount Carmel, and they're having a God showdown. Elijah's there alone, and there's like 1 trillion prophets of Baal, and they're cutting themselves, which is really sad. And Elijah is mocking them, saying that their God is going to the bathroom. And it is so funny to me. And then the idea is whichever God answers by fire is the real God. And the text never lets on that Elijah knows that God is going to do it. It just leaves you wondering. And Elijah, during a drought, has them dump all this water on the altar and everything. It's fantastic. It's such a great chapter. And if we ever go to Israel, you can go to Mount Carmel. It's really beautiful and see exactly where they were. Anyways, obviously, God wins. And I made these memes about that to bless you today in the name of Jesus. And then it's a really intriguing turn in the story because Elijah gets really depressed and he leaves and goes to Mount Horeb, which you may remember. Does anyone remember what Mount Horeb is? Mount Horeb is Mount Sinai. So Elijah leaves this battle and he gets depressed, and that's the part where God says to take a nap and to eat this cake. And then he walks for 40 days all the way back to right where the people of Israel got after they crossed the Red Sea. The people of Israel went there because that's where Moses saw the burning bush. Moses saw the burning bush in the cave at Horeb. And then he left, and then he brought the people back to the same place. And that's where the 10 Commandments were given. I believe it's Mount Jabal al-Lawz, but not everybody believes that. It's okay. You know, people see it differently. The reason I think it's Mount Jabal al-Lawz is because this is what Mount Jabal al-Lawz looks like, and there's what seem to be burnt rocks on the top. And so that makes a lot of sense to me. There's also a gigantic stone next to it that's been split in two, and there's water under the stone, or there's stones under that are smooth. And you can see all this stuff online if you want to see it. It's pretty amazing. But even if it isn't that, it doesn't really matter. The thing that's intriguing is that Elijah goes all the way back to this spot. He knows where it is, or God shows him where it is, and it says that he stayed in a cave. So seemingly, Elijah is in the exact same place where Moses saw the burning bush. And who are the two people that are up on the mount with Jesus? And they're both in the same place, separated by, what was Elijah? Like 1,950? So 400 years later, Elijah's standing in the same place, and he's like, God, I want to die to death. And God speaks to him in a thin silence, is what it says in the Hebrew. And it's just so cool to me. And the Bible doesn't really say this is where this happened. It just, if you know, you know. And so then Ahab's death gets foretold. Elijah's narrative is not over yet. We're going to get to that later. But Ahab's death is foretold. Ahab was a disaster. I think it says in there that Ahab was worse than all of the people before him. And so there's a Lord of the Rings meme for you. And so here's the kings that we've seen so far. And if you have the document, you have all of them. But here's the kings that we've seen so far. And the reason I wanted to give that to you is because it shows the connection between the kings and the prophets. And that is what's going on in Kings. And then the majority of the prophets are written during the time of the kings. And it's not like you have to understand that, but if you don't understand that, it'll just be a little bit confusing. And so there you go, you champions. It just kind of cuts off right there. It's like when they're making like a finale on TV in the 90s and they didn't have enough time, so you had to wait for next week. It's kind of the way it feels when it gets to the end. Here's a few keys. I have like a couple small ones and a couple big ones. Here's a few keys. J. Vernon McGee said, quote, standard of the kingdom, as David his father repeated 9 times in 1 Kings, it was a human standard, but man failed even to attain it. So it might not be clear what he's saying from just reading the thing out loud. He's saying that the phrase, as David his father, was repeated 9 times in 1 Kings. And this is not repeated by characters talking. This is repeated by the author. And so anytime you have a very repeated phrase in the text, you know the author's going for something. It's like the I am statements in John. It's obvious what he's sewing together. This is a statement like that. That's the way you're supposed to feel reading 1 Kings. Is this the guy? No. Is this the guy? No. Is this the guy? No. And then it kind of gets funny after there's been so many of them because none of them are the guy. Ian Proven said, all of this suggests that at least one of the purposes of Kings is to provide its readers with an explanation of their past in terms of the theological program outlined in Deuteronomy, with a view to promoting that program in the present. Ooh, I love that British spelling of program. Don't you? Oh, I just love it. It's so posh. It's like ordering your egg hard boiled at a restaurant. Oh, I love pageantry. Don't you? P-R-O-G-R-A-M. Okay, nope. Nope. Oh, is there one more letter? It's just a couple more M's? Nope, again. We've got an M and then an E. Why? No one knows. Why do we eat beans with breakfast? So it's this aspect of Kings and its connection in this respect with books like Joshua, which has led Old Testament scholars to recent times to refer to Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings together as the Deuteronomic or Deuteronomistic history. Exactly. You see what he's saying? He's saying recent scholars are just reading these books. A lot of them have beliefs I don't agree with. A lot of them think that these were gathered from many sources and they were never really written at the time they were said. That's not what I think, but they do see something that a lot of people miss. The whole point of these books is jumping off of what happened in Deuteronomy. Is God going to bless good behavior? Is God going to curse bad behavior? Is he going to do exactly what he said he is going to do? That's brilliant. That guy also said, Ian Proven also said that 1st and 2nd Kings are didactic, which means that they were written to teach a lesson on purpose. And I think that that's true as well. Paul House said, no careful reader of the Hebrew canon could possibly read Genesis through 2 Kings without noting how the promises concerning land and nationhood seem to have been thwarted. Exactly. That's the point. The point is, when you're focusing on the covenants, you're like, this is way worse than it really appears in the text. Exactly. Because it appears like God isn't doing what he said anymore. It appears like God said, hey, Abraham, you're going to have a land and a people for a time. That's the way it appears. Exactly. Okay, there's 2 kind of like large theological ideas that I want to talk about really quick, and then we can take some questions. Oh yeah, I brought this questions meme. Any questions? So we'll get back to that in a sec. I was so excited when I made that today. I was like, this is going to be great. David S. Pumpkins. So here's two big theological ideas from the book of 1 Kings. Number 1, you have Solomon's temple versus the high hills. So there's this repeat phrase that we talked about last year or 2 years ago in Ezekiel, or whenever that was. And last year when we were talking about Deuteronomy, I can't keep my time straight. Whenever that was when we were talking about this idea of this repeat phrase in the Old Testament, under every green tree. It comes up so often, and it's one of the only repeat phrases that occurs all the way from the writings of Moses all the way through Kings. So you know that it's important, but it's kind of confusing. The thing about it is that there were these hills with these trees on them, and that was where they would do like pagan sex cult worship on top of those. So when the Bible says under every green tree, which it says like 15 times, what it's talking about is it's talking about the differentiation between monotheism located in a temple in the capital versus polytheism, syncretism at your timing at the local pagan sex cult hill. It's pushing those two things and showing you the difference between those two things. And so as a careful, patient reader of Scripture, you will be thinking, wow, God promised to curse this behavior. Oh no, God said in Deuteronomy that if you did these things, the land would vomit you out. Then the exiles happen. This is exactly why, if you understand Deuteronomy, then most of the Old Testament will make sense. And then the next idea that I want to talk about, and then we'll take some questions, is this idea of the spirit of Jezebel. And I want to talk about that because Jezebel is a character in 1 Kings. It is Ahab's wife, and she is a disaster. And so she is kind of like what every misogynist thinks that all women are like. And man, you guys don't like that type of humor. Who hurt you? I'm gonna process that later. So Jezebel is a character. And in Pentecostal circles, there is this idea of a woman having what's called the spirit of Jezebel, which is a divisive, angry spirit that seeks to subvert authority and hates authority. Then you have people that are super conservative saying there is no named spirits other than the devil and demons. That's it. And I do not agree with that, and I will tell you why. Because A, the spirit of Jezebel is talked about kind of in Revelation, and B, even if it wasn't, in the book of Acts, it talks about, and this is a big deal. People do this all the time. People are constantly on the internet mocking Pentecostals, being like, you're anti-woman because you talk about the spirit or whatever, and this, you say this person has the spirit of Jezebel, blah, blah, blah. This is like a thing. If you're not in those kind of like theological arguments or discussions, this is a thing that's talked about like, I don't know, pretty constantly. And I disagree with kind of like the general Baptist conservative Christian take. And the reason I disagree with it, and the reason why I think the spirit of Jezebel is a real thing, not only because of what it says in Revelation, is because in the book of Acts, when there's that girl who's walking around, and remember she has that demon, and it's like she has a it says in Acts, in the ESV, she has a spirit of divination, remember? And she's like screaming, these men present to you the Most High God, and Paul gets really irritated and casts the demon out. Not because he wanted to help the person, but because he was irritated, which is wild that it says that in the text. But the thing that's even more wild is it doesn't say spirit of divination in Greek. It says spirit of Python, which is the name of a Greek god from that time. And so from my perspective, the idea that Scripture is positing is there are other various spirits. We're not going to give you an exhaustive list because the Bible is not an encyclopedia. So do I think Christians need to fixate on stuff like that? No, but I also think that it's foolish to assume that you understand everything about the spiritual realm because you're trying to prove that you believe in biblical fidelity. That's what I wanted to say. Any questions? Do we have where's our guy? There's our guy. If you have a question in the room, you can raise your hand. We got one here in the front, and we'll see what we got on the internet.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi. I had a question about something that I noticed the last time I read First Kings, and I just wanted to ask your opinion on it, or if I'm overthinking it, because I never noticed it before. Speaking of the adversary that was raised against Solomon, Hadad, I noticed that King David's army wanted to wipe out all the males in Edom, all the Edomites, and Hadad fled to Egypt and survived. And then hundreds of years later, King Herod, who was an Edomite, ordered all the babies in Bethlehem, or the male babies in Bethlehem, killed, and Jesus, who was a descendant of King David, fled to Egypt and survived. And I was wondering if there was significance to that, or if it's just something.
Yeah, what a great question. What a great question. Yeah, there is significance to that. I see it as the Bible intentionally winking at the past. Just like when it takes Elijah 40 days to walk back to Mount Horeb, and it took the Israelites 40 years to do the trip in reverse, I think that that's intentional. I also think it happened, but I think that the inclusion of that detail is intentional. And the inclusion of the Egypt detail is because it happened. It's also included because of the prophecy in Hosea, out of Egypt have I called my son. And is that what it says? Is it Hosea 11 or 12? I just get stressed that Brad is going to criticize me. So that's genuinely the truth. Okay, so yes, out of Egypt I called my son. And so I think that is that. Does that help? Good, I'm so glad. Okay, does anybody else have a question? Let me see what we got online. Okay. From Nick, I am studying at Clear Creek Baptist College for missionary ministry. Whoa, let's hear it for Nick. What a champion. You love to hear it. Make sure you learn about the Holy Spirit from some Pentecostals though, big guy. So, got people watching from home. Happy Tuesday. Watching from my daughter's volleyball practice. Once again, I love it. Someday your daughter's gonna be sitting with you and being like, I just don't feel like you paid enough attention to me. And you're gonna be like, the spirit of Jezebel is real, okay? It's real, and I'm seeing it right now, okay? You love pageantry. Yes, I do, Tracy. Yes, I do. To a limit. To a limit. Like, there is a limit to that. Like, there's this one woman who attends here. I've made fun of this to her face, just so you know, multiple times. I don't make fun of people behind their backs. I do if I've already made fun of them to their face about the same thing. Does that make sense? That to me is a very important thing. Anyways, she like always shows me her like bedazzled coffee cups on Sunday, and they're just the worst. They're just the worst thing. And so she knows that they bother me, so she always comes up and shows them to me. And she had one that said, wow, and the wow was covered in these little plastic diamonds, and the O was the crown of thorns. And I was just like, ooh, I don't know if I can get behind this. This is why our Savior suffered. As the wood was scraped into his scalp, he was thinking, someday a woman will drink a caramel macchiato at 8:45 a.m. out of a pink bedazzled wow cup with a Roman torture device on the cover. My Bible, here's one from Hunter. My Bible commentary said Naomi was telling Ruth to sleep at Boaz's feet was a cultural thing and not sexual in any way. Could this be true, or is it hogwash? Well, thanks for using the word hogwash, first of all. I think we should bring that back. You feel good about that? Where's Blake? He's our resident Gen Z person. Blake, should we get hogwash back in the mix? Okay, I think so. So he said his Bible, oh, you're talking about, oh yeah. So this is like something we talked about a few weeks ago. So my Bible commentary said Naomi was telling Ruth to sleep at Boaz's feet was a cultural thing. You tell me. You tell me. Is it a cultural thing if a woman tells a widow to go to where a man is sleeping at the end of a long work day, lift up the blanket off of his feet. Feet in the Bible also implies more than that. And then lay at his feet and then say, I am your servant when he wakes up. You tell me. You're not stupid, bro. You're very, very smart. What is it talking about? Why do people say that it's cultural, though? People say that it's cultural because they want to make the Old Testament characters heroes when they're not. And they're very, very uncomfortable when people are not heroes. That's why people are very uncomfortable with the story of Noah getting drunk and the part of Joseph's character that is very arrogant at the beginning and the part of Moses' character where he hits the rock to show off. People are uncomfortable with these parts. And so they're like, no, Ruth was a trad wife. No, she wasn't. She was from Moab. That's the whole point, is that God redeemed her anyway, despite her bad decisions. Whether you think that's a bad decision or not doesn't really matter. And so I hope that helps, bro. And so it's okay. Sometimes I think Bible commentaries take a route that perhaps is a bit easier. And all those guys are geniuses and they know way more about Hebrew than me. But sometimes they take kind of like the easy way out. Like in that passage in Job, where it says that like the tail of the animal knocks over the cedars. I read this Bible commentary that was like, that's alligators. And then it says, and one of the animals lets forth a river from his mouth. And this guy was like, that's a hippopotamus. And I was like, oh, dude, come on. Have some fun. Have some fun. It's dinosaurs, bro. Always has been, always will be. It says Leviathan in the next chapter, big guy. Come on. Let's let the Bible be mystical again. Okay. Is it skewed or heretical to see that Elijah wanted to sit there and die, AKA be suicidal because Jezebel swore to kill Elijah within a certain time frame? What a great question. Thank you for that question. That's a great question. Is it skewed or heretical to see that Elijah wanted to sit there and die? So he must mean what? Is it skewed or heretical for who? The guy reading to see that? Is that what he means by that? Is that what he means? You can make a facial expression. Yeah, I think that is what he means. Is it skewed or heretical to see that Elijah wanted to sit there and die? No, I mean, that's what it says. I'll just answer what I think you're asking. I'm doing the best that I can. Because I think the thing you're touching on is a really good point. I just don't understand the specific wording that you're saying. Yes, it teaches a spiritual principle, which is that oftentimes after like a really high comes a really low. It's also teaching a spiritual principle, which is that even the best of us, that's a mosquito, even the best of us sometimes struggles mentally and emotionally. And Elijah was alone for a really long time. And he was just down and out, and he thought he was gonna die. And he got really low. And I love sections like that. It's the exact same thing that I was talking about with Ruth. I love that section because I relate to that. And I have felt things like that. And I understand what it feels like to be so low and feel like no one knows, and how isolating and lonely that can feel. And I love that the Bible is willing to do what many Christians are not willing to do and go all the way past the awkwardness of that and be like, this guy, this icon, he felt like that. And he said that to God, and God still spoke to him. And I think that that's really great. That's one of my favorite things in the whole Old Testament. Okay, here's some more comments, and then we'll go to our groups, unless there's another one in the room. In 2 Kings 9, when Jehu comes riding furiously to fulfill his divine mission of judgment, the watchman says, the driving is like the driving of Jehu, son of Nimshi. He drives like a madman. If this scene had a soundtrack, would it be more like Highway to Hell or Bad to the Bone? Brad, ask more questions like this. That's good. I think Welcome to the Jungle by Guns N' Roses, right? That'd be good. Yeah. Not that I've ever heard it, but I've read people saying that that's a good song if you are not a Christian. So is there another question over here? Hey.
It's a legit Nephilim question in context.
Yeah.
So I was using my Rosetta Stone app to learn some Hebrew, and I realized that the Hebrew word for husband is Baal. And because like the angels took wives to make Nephilim, I'm curious if you've ever read anything that was saying, or like the sex cults were trying to make more Nephilim, like that was their goal with the sex cults to the Baals, if they were like, the Baals were like the angels who took wives, or in their heads were like, they're wannabe baby mamas of Nephilim.
Definitely was fertility, and it definitely helps, understand why the statues were so tall.
Yeah.
And it helps you understand a couple of little things. Like there's little things that when you understand the Nephilim, it really makes more sense. I've never read an article like that, but send me one. I'd love to read it.
I'm just speculating myself. That's why I was wondering if you ever read anything.
I haven't, but I would love to if you find something. But I do think that, I'm sure you'd agree with this, there's certain passages that make a lot more sense, like when the angels are with Lot in Genesis, and the people are coming and they're like gonna rip down the door to have sex with these people. It makes no sense until you understand
they're trying.
Exactly. They're trying to replicate something that they had either seen people who are that tall, or wanted to become something like that, or wanted to father something like that, or something like that.
Makes sense.
And it makes a lot more sense. And then it makes a lot more sense why God was like, this city is a disaster.
It's got to go.
This is a disaster. Okay, cool. We got one here?
It's me. 2 comments and then a question about last week.
Okay.
First comment is, I think it would be Ace of Spades by Motorhead would be the song. Okay.
Good.
Would be the song.
Off to a good start.
The second one, when you were talking about the temple and being built on Mount Moriah, heard a long time ago, and it really made sense that the Holy Land being the center of the world, so that everything east of the Holy Land is considered the East, like the Middle East, the Far East, and everything to the West is considered the West. That's kind of an interesting thought. I don't know if you ever heard that one. My question was about David. Something that, one of these things that I always, every time I read it, and I just read it recently, I always go, when he was on the run, and he's living in the cave, and he's got his mighty men gathered around him in 2 Samuel, and he says, the Philistines' garrison was in Bethlehem. And he's like, oh, I wish I had some of that water from Bethlehem. And the 3 were known as the 3 of the mighty men. Decide, okay, we're going to go get it for him. And they go and they break through and they get him some of the water and they bring it back. And he pours it out, just pours it out and says, I won't drink what these guys sacrificed their blood for. To me, I've always thought that's the biggest, like, in-your-face L. You know what I mean? Yeah. For that guy. I don't know. There's kind of like with what I asked you last week about the other thing about if you thought that was a win or a loss on
I think
Absalom.
I love talking about stuff like that because it is ambiguous in the Bible, and so you really can take either lane. And I think it's fun on stuff like that. I haven't read any commentaries on that section, but it would be really fun to read them and see what they say and see if they thought that was a good decision, good leadership, or a poor decision. I don't have any opinion on it personally, but I find that stuff really interesting too.
Jerk.
Oh, they muted you, Brad.
Oh.
What were you?
I cussed.
You cussed? Oh, they bleeped you. I think that'd be a good development for your character, honestly. Okay, really quick, we have like one more on the internet and then we'll go to our groups. Okay, it's the same guy who asked this question before. He ran for his life. I think the prophet really wanted to die. Am I wrong? No, I think you're right. I think you're right. He definitely said it. I mean, how much do we actually mean things that we say when we're very, very, very upset? You know, we'd have no way of knowing what his personality type was, but I do think that that's true, and that's what I think is so brilliant. Yeah. That's a tough one for sure. Okay, here's the questions, and we're gonna be back next Tuesday for a Passover Seder, And it's not a dinner unless you want to fill up on parsley. And if you want to do that, that's fine. And so we'll see you guys here next week, and I'm looking forward to it.